Good evening and welcome back once again after a brief absence to Channel 514, where we are continuing our series exploring ancient literature. And tonight we will round off our discussion of Homer's Odyssey by discussing and summarizing books 17 through 24 of the poem. And before I launch into that, and I'll try to take us through it at a good clip, I will refer back to something that was mentioned in a previous video about alternative interpretations, or if you like, revisionist interpretations of the poem in general, and especially these latter books. Now, it's not that uncommon to come across a feminist interpretation of these books of the Odyssey or of the poem in general, in which we are mostly concerned with the plight of female characters like Penelope, of course, or like the maidservants, and in particular the maidservants at the Ithacan court, who are aligned with the suitors, who are of course the villains of our story. And one example of this would be the poem by Margaret Atwood, I believe, which sets itself up as sort of an alternative Odyssey from the point of view of some of the female characters. I actually haven't read most of that, but I am familiar with a part at the end in which Odysseus and his son, I believe, and the herdsman are blamed for executing the maidservants whom I just mentioned, who had aligned themselves with the suitors. And so obviously it's a harsh passage, but in any case I just wanted to bring that back to your attention. There's that reading, and there's also a sort of social critical reading in which we're mainly concerned with the difficulties that the suitors are having in their courtship of Penelope. So, according to that reading, they're all having a hard time getting a leg up in the world because Penelope isn't going along with the usual way of things. She is holding out hope for her long-lost husband and trying to keep her property in her family, etc., when the more natural thing would be to remarry and let some other family ally itself with her family and share the wealth, so to speak. And so in either of these two readings that I've just mentioned, our hero comes across more as our villain, as a tyrant who wants to reassert a position in Ithaca, his former island kingdom, a position which he has effectively forfeited by being away for so long. Now, I'm sure there are other readings, but those are just two that I've come across multiple times now. I mention them to make a more general point that our poet, and I believe it is one poet, is pretty clear and unapologetic about expressing his own views. So really what our poet is really saying is pretty unambiguous, and if you want to read something else into it, well, who's to stop you from doing so? But of course you are reading something into it. So there is the Homeric view, or the Homeric reading, and then there are any number of views that you might call un-Homeric. So, well, for whatever that's worth, there you go. Now, let's go ahead and continue discussing and summarizing the books of the poem. Now, we left off with book 16, where Odysseus' son Telemachus had just returned to the island after a trip in which he visited Pylos and Sparta, hoping to get news, hoping to hear some or get some information about his father's possible whereabouts. And so now he's returned, and he's actually been reintroduced or introduced to his father for the first time. He hasn't seen his father since infancy, so he has no memory of him. But now the family is reunited, or at least father and son are reunited. And Odysseus is staying with one of his herdsmen who also knows who he is. So Odysseus has two allies in his burgeoning campaign to regain control of his island, and they are, of course, his son and his herdsman. And no one else knows that he's back, and his friend, the goddess Athena, has disguised him as a beggar, so he'll be able to get the drop on everybody because they don't know who he is, and they don't know that Odysseus, whose return they've all been either eagerly awaiting or dreading, has actually returned. So let's go right ahead and keep on summarizing and discussing, as I'm constantly saying, because we're not actually reading too many passages word for word to save time, but we're summarizing. Now anyway, let's go right ahead with that. So Book 17, our translator Robert Fagles, and again I'm using this translation merely as a matter of convenience. I have it in one other translation here, but if you like another, then that's fine. But all of them are fine as far as I'm concerned. But here we are with Telemachus going from the hut where Eumaeus the herdsman lives, the swineherd, to the town or the village where his family's stronghold is, and he's going to check in and let everyone know that he's returned, etc. And of course the suitors had been hoping to ambush him on his way home and have him killed, but anyway, he goes home and talks to the old nurse, Euryclea, and to his mother, and of course his mother is excited that he's back and everything, and let's see, he doesn't stay long. He's quick to put in an appearance and then take off again, saying that he has guests and he has to make sure that they're attended to properly, etc. So, and remember, hospitality is an important theme in our story. So he heads off again, and let's see. Oh, but of course, before that happens, his wife, his mother, that is Penelope, asks for news of Odysseus. Did Telemachus get any news from any of the people that he visited? And all he tells her is that he heard a few things about how his father had been tossed about by wave and storm and had ended up on an island, it says here, off in a goddess' house, the nymph Calypso, who holds him there by force. He has no way to voyage home to his native land, etc., etc. So, anyway, or actually, I don't think that's... No, okay, yeah, I think that is Telemachus talking. That might actually be one of the guests talking, though, a seer named Theoclymenos. But let's see. So now, back at the hut, the swineherd's hut, Eumaeus the swineherd and Odysseus are getting ready to go into town themselves. And so, off they go, and who should they meet on their way into town but the goatherd Melanthius. So I may have mentioned earlier, we have 3 herdsmen in our story, and one of the important themes in our story is the problems or the concerns or the different positions that the townspeople or the islanders find themselves in. And so we have 2 herdsmen, a goatherd or a swineherd and a cowherd, Eumaeus and Philoetios, and they're loyal to their former king. Then you have a goatherd, Melanthius. He's on the suitor's side. He's a bad herdsman. So again, you have this reading in which the suitors are not so bad, but to our poet, the suitors are bad guys. So their people on the island, the people who are aligned with them, are portrayed as just as bad as them. So here we meet the goatherd, and he abuses the swineherd, and he abuses the Odysseus, who's apparently a poor beggar, also, and says that both are fit to be slaves, etc., and that they're going to eventually get what's coming to them, or whatever. So, now, let's see, we'll move on. And so here's a very touching scene where Odysseus gets to the town, and he sees a dog that is fastened in its usual place, and it's one of his hunting dogs that he had just been raising from a puppy when he left. So apparently it's a 20-year-old dog, which is titanically old for a dog, and it's a big dog, of course, and they don't live for as long, but so it's kind of far-fetched in its way, but it's a poignant scene that everyone likes here, or everyone just finds it really sad. But anyway, Odysseus meets his dog, and the dog knows it's his master, even though no one else can tell who he really is unless Athena, the goddess, uses her power to lower the disguise which she's placed over her favorite, Odysseus. So no one else can tell who he is, but the dog can, so the dog is excited to see its master, and Odysseus, though, can't pet the dog or can't greet the dog, etc. He just has to pretend like, hey, why is this dog so excited? That's not my dog, So the dog just kind of has a heart attack and dies, and so it's pretty sad. But anyway, I don't want to. We're really behind on time here, so I wanna keep moving along. Now, anyway, off they go into the house, and they meet some of the suitors. And immediately the suitors are abusing the swineherd Eumaeus, and so they're always abusing him, as he's reported in the previous books. And so we see again how they're bad guys. And so one of the two leaders of the suitors is this guy Antinous, and I introduced him towards the end of our previous video. And Antinous is portrayed as being a brash bully who just is always picking fights with everybody. So anyway, now Antinous says, "Why drag this to town? Haven't we got our share of vagabonds to deal with, disgusting beggars who lick the feasters' plate?" So he's, angry that the swineherd has brought another beggar to town. And so, anyway, there's a little bit of dialogue here, some snappy dialogue, and where do we go from there? Well, Antinous actually showing himself a bad host in someone else's house, but anyway, he abuses the beggar. He throws something at him. I think he throws a stool at him or something like that. And so now Penelope hears about this, and so she sees that the beggar Odysseus is welcomed, etc. She's, being a good hostess, showing good hospitality. And so, anyway, and we leave. That's what's kind of going on at the end of Book 17. Now, at the beginning of Book 18, which Fagles calls the Beggar King of Ithaca, we meet the suitor's pet beggar, this guy named Eros. And as I said, everyone who's aligned with the suitors is portrayed as some sort of nasty, nefarious person, and this is an example of that. You have this guy Eros, who is described as being an impoverished nobleman who's become a vagrant because he's squandered his wealth. And so he's a belligerent, violent character, and so he's scared away all the normal beggars from the court where the suitors are always feasting. So even their beggar is a bad beggar, and he's scared all the normal beggars away. So Eros comes along, and he wants to pick a fight with Odysseus, thinking that he's just a smaller, weaker beggar. And what happens, I think you can guess what happens is Odysseus, clocks Eros and lays him out flat. And so the suitors are amused by this. They like to see their pet beggar amused them with his foolish antics, and so now they're amused at seeing this. And so now they're a little bit nicer to Odysseus the beggar. And let's see where to go from there. Well, here the old nurse, Euroclea, is again in action, and there's a scene later where she discovers who Odysseus is, but I don't think that is right about to happen here. Anyway, so the suitors present gifts to Penelope at this point, and we meet this character Melantho. I'm not sure if we've met her before by this point, but she's the lover of this character Eurymachus, who I also introduced in the previous video. And aside from Antinous, he's the other of the suitors' two leaders. So Antinous is sort of a violent bully, and Eurymachus is the smooth talker and the, well, a clever sort of fellow who's also from a family that's closely allied with Odysseus' own family. So he has a good chance at marrying Penelope ultimately, or so he hopes. And so anyway, those are their two leaders. And Melantho, of course, we meet her here, and she is the lover of Eurymachus, so she's one of these maidservants and other retainers of the Ithacan royal house that are aligned with the suitors. So, let's see. What else goes on here? Eurymachus offers Odysseus the beggar some honest work, I think. And the beggar also, I think at this point, he has regaled the suitors with an interesting story, another Cretan tale, although I don't think he actually describes himself as a Cretan in this one. Maybe he does. I should clear that up. But anyway, he tells yet another made-up story about who he is and what sort of adventures he's had before making his way here to Ithaca. So that's something else you have in Book 18 now. Let's see. Well, we'll leave it at that for Book 18. So now we have Book 19, Penelope and her guest. And let's see. Sorry for the delay. Let's just see now. Apparently, Telemachus gets all of the weapons in the house into a safe place where only he and Odysseus and their friends will know where they are, the weapons that is, because they're planning on killing all the suitors and they don't want the suitors to be able to arm themselves. And so Telemachus has the old nurse help him move all the weapons. He says to safeguard them from the smoke. So let's see. Where to go from there. So here Melantho, who I just mentioned, the girlfriend of Eurymachus, is yelling at Odysseus the beggar. So like the suitors and Eros and everybody else, the goat herd, she's one of these villains in our story. So she's yelling at the beggar. "You still here?" she says. "You pest, slinking around the house all night, leering up at the women. Get out, you tramp. Be glad of the food you got, or we'll sling a torch at you. Rout you out at once." So not very nice. Not very good hospitality. Let's see. Penelope rebukes Melantho. Now, and she sees that the stranger will be well accommodated as he stays the night in the house. And she also mentions the shroud, a burial shroud that she's making for Odysseus' father Laertes. And of course that is a trick that she's using to trick the suitors, or to defer their hopes, telling them that she can't choose one of them until she finishes making this shroud. And of course she undoes her work every night, and so that's why this shroud that Penelope is making is sort of one of these enduring favorite images from Greek mythology and literature that comes up here and there in later literature, even down to modern times. Now, let's see. Here, I think, here Penelope tells the stranger, who's actually Odysseus, how she was using this trick and one of her maids spilled the secret to the suitors. So she has an informer in her midst. Now anyway, here Odysseus now tells another Cretan tale about a made-up story about this person who's the Cretan. So the Cretan, again, is his alter ego, and he has a new Cretan tale every time he has occasion to spin one when he meets someone, and he wants to give them some bogus explanation of who he is and what he's after. But anyway, we discussed that in a video I made about the Cretan tales not that long ago. So let's see. Anyway, they go on talking, and let's see. So here they are. So the old nurse, Euroclea, who was Odysseus' nurse when he was himself a child, she is going to wash his feet. And of course, he has a scar from a hunting accident that she is going to recognize. And so as soon as she's getting ready to wash his feet, he realizes, oh no, she's going to recognize my scar, but it's too late to stop her. And so she actually drops his foot while she's washing it and is so taken aback by this. And so he leans in and tells her not to reveal to anyone that he's come back and that he's planning on killing all the suitors and he's going to take over the island again. So he wants her to just cooperate. So she's happy to do so. She's happy that he's back and that he's going to restore things to the way they were. So let's see. Here now, in the very next passage, Penelope tells Odysseus about a dream she's had, and he interprets the dream for her. So I won't go into detail about that, but it's in Book 19, around lines 560, 570, and following up to about 630 or so in this translation. Although, of course, these line numbers, they vary from one translation to another, but if you wanted to look for it, that would give you a rough idea. So anyway, now Penelope also tells a story, or she tells Odysseus what her plan is, what she wants to do about the suitors, that she's going to have an archery contest, basically, that's going to either put them off once and for all, or decide which of them she'll marry. But anyway, now so Odysseus is sleeping, and Athena interrupts his sleep. She speaks to him, saying, "Why still awake? And here is your house, your wife at home, your son, as fine a boy as one could hope to have." And so he's worried about how, he says, how can I get these shameless suitors into my clutches, single-handed, braving an army, always camped inside, etc. So Athena says, "Lo, I'm a goddess. I'm a goddess, look, the very one who guards you in all your trials to the last. Even if 50 bands of mortal fighters closed around us, hot to kill us off in battle, still you could drive away their herds and sleek flocks." So she tells him that, get some sleep, I'm going to help you kill the suitors, so, it's not going to be that hard, so don't worry about it. So anyway, so another day dawns, And so now everyone is gathering together, and the suitors are back to feasting and celebrating, or having a good time anyway, and some of the retainers of the family, or the court, are coming into town. We meet the goatherd again, Melanthius, who's come to bring the suitors the pick of his flocks, it says, to make the suitors' meal. So he's such a good henchman to them. He's bringing them some animals every day for them to feast on. And also Philoetios the cowherd arrives, and I believe this is where Odysseus and his friends approach the cowherd, and they explain the situation to him, and he joins their little band. And so now they're really getting close to hatching their plan, or putting their plan into action. And let's see. So, let's see. Well, the party goes on, and there's just some dialogue between Telemachus and the suitors, etc. But I don't think the archery contest has been announced yet at this point. Well, anyway, Fagles calls this book, Book 20, Portents Gather, because there's all this suggestive dialogue about what's going to happen in the rest of our story. So Telemachus is telling the suitors that something bad is about to break upon them, and they're laughing at him, etc. So portents, Now we get to Book 21, Odysseus Strings His Bow. So here's a story that's probably pretty familiar to you, where Penelope brings out Odysseus' bow that he had left behind. And he has a really well-made, specially made bow. And it's made so that it's difficult to string, and so only he can string it, either because he's more heroic than everybody else, or everybody in Ithaca anyway, or because only he knows the trick to it. But Penelope wants everyone to try and string the bow and then shoot an arrow through a series of rings that are placed either at the bottom of the haft of an axe or on top of the axe head. And so, of course, that's a hard trick shot, so I guess she's hoping none of them will be able to do it, or if one of them is able to do it, well, then at least he's good at something. But anyway, so she challenges them to this, and at first they sort of balk at it, and they say that it's not fair that she should come up with such an arbitrary requirement for them, but then they eventually are prevailed upon and sort of shamed into agreeing to the contest. And the first of them to step up to the plate, as it were, or the mark from which they're going to shoot, is this character named Leodes, Oinop's son, a seer who could see their futures in the smoke, who always sat by the glowing wine bowl well back, the one man in the group who loathed their reckless ways, appalled by all their outrage. So, he, besides being one of the suitors, is also a seer who apparently takes the omens or performs acts of divination for the suitors, and apparently he has some moral issues or ambivalence about the life that they're living in Ithaca. And so anyway, we find that out about him, but it turns out that won't be enough to save this character, of course, because he's going to be killed like the other suitors and their friends. But anyway, so none of them are able to string the bow, not even brash Antinous, who is always quick to egg everyone on and sort of challenge everyone to a fight, etc. But no one's able to do this, and so finally Odysseus, apparently the beggar Odysseus, in fact, even Telemachus tries and makes a big show of trying and what a hard time he's having, and then gives up and says that, he's sure one of the suitors, they're such valiant men, surely they'll be able to do this. But so finally they let Odysseus try, although at first they're reluctant to do this, or, they think that it would be dishonorable to let a beggar try and possibly succeed where they failed, but they're prevailed on to let him try, and we all know what happens. He shoots a perfect shot, and so everyone's marveling at this, and then while they're marveling, he takes another shot at Antinous, one of the two leaders of the suitors, and kills him with an arrow. In the throat, I think. And so now they're springing the trap. And so Odysseus sends his son and the herdsmen to get all the weapons that they had set aside, and the suitors go looking about for something with which to arm themselves, but they find that there is nothing to hand because these guys have hidden everything from them. And so they defend themselves with tables and stools and things like that. And Odysseus keeps on shooting at them, and dropping them with his arrows, and there's this whole battle going on. And let's see. Eventually, Melantho, or one of the lovers, the maidservants who are lying with the suitors, eventually one of them, I think, goes to get some weapons with which the suitors can defend themselves, and so the battle becomes more evenly matched, but Odysseus and his friends kill all the suitors. And they also kill all the suitors' servants and everyone who's allied with them. And let's see. There's a scene where the suitor's priest, a priest of the gods who, for some reason, was acting as a retainer or a hanger-on with the suitors, he begs Odysseus for mercy. He clutches at the man's knees in the traditional posture of supplication, but Odysseus is not to be placated, and he kills the man. And so then he's about to do the same to a musician who was also spending time, who was also hanging out there with the suitors, but he decides not to kill the musician because it's just wrong to do that. And so it's okay. It was okay to kill the priest, but a musician is even something, in this case, in this cultural context, that's even something more auspicious than this priest. And so he doesn't kill the musician. And then, of course, his herald comes out, this character named Medon, who is the official messenger of the family. He comes out from behind a tapestry and asks for mercy, and because he had always been loyal and had not aligned himself with the suitors, Odysseus spares him also. And let's see. What else happens here? So, I hope I'm not getting things badly out of order here, but they also execute the goatherd and the maidservants who had been lying with the suitors. And that's described in some detail. The goatherd, it says, they hauled him out through the doorway into the court, lopped his nose and ears with a ruthless knife, tore his, there's a word here, out, tore his something out for the dogs to eat raw, and in manic fury hacked off hands and feet. And I think well, that's all I see here. So, not long after this, they also execute these maidservants by hanging, all in a row. And so these are some of these harsh passages that turn a lot of people off, really. But But in Homer's view, as I said before, this is the triumph of right order, because all of these characters are portrayed as villains who are getting their just desserts now. Anyway, Book 23 Fagles calls the Great Rooted Bed, because Odysseus now has to reveal his true identity to his wife, who's been waiting for him all this time, and he has to prove to her that he really is Odysseus. And so the way he does this is by describing to her a bed that he had made, which he had actually made from out of the trunk of a living tree, and so it can't be moved. And so she tests him by saying, well, if you're Odysseus, then we'll move your bed in here, so you can sleep out here, for whatever reason why you would want to do that, but we're going to move it out here. And he says, no, you can't move it because I made it out of a living tree trunk. So then she knows it's really him. Anyway, he goes on and tells her about all his adventures, about where he's been, and they're having a happy reunion. And let's make sure there's nothing in here that I want to mention specially before moving on to the very last few pages of our story. Well, there's this part where Odysseus and Penelope are talking about dreams, and I wish I could find it and get a more of a crystal clear idea of it so I could describe it better to you. But basically they say that dreams come up to us from the underworld, where there are two gates that they could go through. And I think if they are true, if they're telling you some real insight into something in waking life, then they'll go through a gate made out of horn. And if they're false dreams that want to, I guess, delude you by telling you something you might want to hear, then they'll go through a gate made out of ivory. So horn is a lot humbler than ivory, but so that's this thing about dreams and the two gates. But anyway, maybe you've heard of that already, but it's not something hard to find in here or to look up online if you're interested in that. But it is interesting, really, but I'll move on. So Book 4, Fagles calls peace, because here we finally restore peace to we see peace restored in Ithaca. And so first we see Hermes, the messenger of the Olympian gods, who was believed to be responsible for escorting the shades of the dead to the underworld. So here he is escorting the shades of the suitors to the underworld. And they meet some famous Homeric characters like Ajax and Agamemnon, etc., who ask them who they are and where they're coming from, and they basically say, well, we're the suitors and Odysseus killed us, and so here we are, we're dead and we're here. Now anyway, Odysseus then wants to go to be reunited with his father. And his mother, having died, I think died of grief or pined away during his long absence, his father is living in or at a property of their family out by the sea. So he's living away from everyone and just working his own land and living in a sad, dejected obscurity, and pining for his son as his wife had done. And so Odysseus is reunited with his father, and he puts his father to the test. It says, I will put my father to the test, see if the old man knows me now on sight or fails to after 20 years apart. And his father, I don't think, recognizes him, but and Odysseus, as usual, sort of struggles with himself as to whether he should reveal his true identity right away or somehow go, have some kind of play some kind of game with his father. But anyway, again, he tells another Cretan tale, so to speak, although I'm not sure he mentions being from Crete in this one. He says, I sailed from Sicily, but anyway, we have yet another story. And finally, though, he reveals who he really is to his father, and they're happily reunited. But what happens next? Well, they go to meet with the herdsmen and Telemachus, and so everyone's together, and now they confer with each other about consolidating their reconquest of the island, because the suitors' families are going to want revenge. And so there's a danger that the whole situation will just descend into a cycle of violence, a self-perpetuating cycle of violence. So anyway, the father of Antinous, Eupeithes, rallies the families of the suitors, or the ones who are from Ithaca anyway, and they get together and they go on the warpath, and they're coming after Odysseus. And so the two sides clash, and Odysseus kills Eupeithes, the leader of the suitors' families. But Athena then appears, or it says cried out, if she had not cried out in a piercing voice that stopped all fighters cold, hold back, you men of Ithaca, back from brutal war. Break off, shed no more blood, make peace at once. So they make peace, and let's see. And Athena, this now disguising herself as Mentor, the old man, his name is Mentor, as I mentioned. Maybe that's probably, I'm guessing, where we get that English word. But anyway, she disguises herself as this old man, Mentor, once again, and she, it says, handed down her pacts of peace. So she arranges the peace between Odysseus and his family and the other families of the island. And so we have a happy ending where the right order of things is restored, and good governance is restored, and well, anyway, the kind of social order and the kind of political situation and really the sort of life in general that Homer holds up as ideal or as commendable or as better than any alternative, etc., is restored in Ithaca. And so, as I mentioned in our previous videos, I'll just hammer on that nail one more time. That's one of the major themes of our poem here, is the restoration of right order in Ithaca, which of course is just this obscure little island kingdom that seems contemptible or unimportant compared to the city of Troy or Mycenae or these great Sparta or these great kingdoms, and well, these great kingdoms ruled over by great personages that we meet, of course, all over the Iliad and in various parts of the Odyssey. So the proper goodly Homeric world is restored, and that is, along with the adventures of Odysseus, that is what the Odyssey, I think, is all about. And so we've discussed the whole thing now, and as we continue this series, I'll discuss the Homeric Hymns pretty briefly. That's just one little volume, and there are several different texts in it in which different stories about the gods are recounted, etc. But after that, we'll move on to Hesiod, the poet Hesiod, and his great poems, the Theogony and the Works and Days, and then the fragments associated with him, whether they're authentic or not. But anyway, thanks for joining us for our series on the Odyssey and on the Iliad. And if there's anything else I think of, in fact, there is something that I'd like to devote to a very short video sometime later this evening or sometime this week. That'll just be 5 or 10 minutes or so. But anyway, thanks very much once again, and I hope this. I know this one wasn't really up to the same standard. I hope I would. Well, it seems to me anyway. It didn't necessarily come out as well as the previous one, but here you are. I'll cut this off at about 46 minutes. So have a great week. I hope your Advent season is off to a great start, and I will be seeing you soon. So take care.